Hi, this is Brooks with Character Design Forge. This is the first 8 installments, what you're watching now, in a daily character illustration series that I'm doing in December, all starring Star Wars characters. The first one up here is Chewbacca, because I feel like Chewbacca's a good character to start with. What I want to do is kind of walk you through my process just really briefly for each of these characters, some of the struggles that I've been going through with this series, sort of the mechanics of doing something on a daily basis. The first problem that needed a solution that I was presented with this month was actually narrowing down which characters I wanted to illustrate with only 31 days. With a lot of franchises, having 31 slots available means that you're going to have to really stretch to find that many characters, but Star Wars is something that spanned so many years of work, so many movies, so much extra outside comics, games, books. There's plenty of characters to choose from, so narrowing it down to 31 was actually pretty difficult for me. The first here is Chewbacca, and you see me doing a lot of weird stylistic stuff with the head there up until the end, and really part of that was that I'm trying to nail a good sort of unique take on these characters, kind of trying to figure out what I was doing, what I was bringing uniquely to the table for the series, and maybe I haven't quite landed on what that is yet. At this point in doing it. Mostly this series is just for fun. It's not meant for anything. There are a lot of other projects that I'm doing along at the same time, so this is just something to kind of sit down either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. And I think one of the main things is that I'm aiming for a little bit more of a realistic style. It's still very stylized, but compared to most of my normal work that you see, that's all kinds of colorful and happy cartoon sheep, this is still maintaining some of the main proportions of the realistic versions of the character. Just now you saw General Grievous, which I was pretty happy with. That is actually the high-res version of that file, is the monthly download available for $5 patrons on Patreon. I'll tell you guys a little bit more about some new Patreon stuff I've been doing. Maz Kanata here was a lot of fun. This attempt I was going for was sort of an old Disney style character, as in a character who is physically aged or old in old Disney 2D animated movies. I think with one more pass, I would have nailed a really cool design for this character. And as we go into Kanan, who's next here, that kind of brings up one of the next big challenges for this series. Obviously, when you're doing something daily, when you don't have necessarily a buffer, which I haven't in this series, there's going to be days where either you don't have enough time or you're just not really able to draw, and I think that's not something that's really understandable unless you are drawing every day, that there are just days when you can't do it. The focus or the energy, the ability is just not quite clicking. And for Kanan, one of the biggest things was that we were leaving on a trip. I had a very limited amount of time to actually get him out, so this initial sketch is what I had to end up illustrating just due to time constraints. And so this was the first of these characters that I really wasn't happy with, but it's kind of like at the end of the day, it has to just get out. So it is what it is. Next up is one of the coolest characters that has come out of the expanded universe of Star Wars, which is Ahsoka Tano, and especially the treatment of the character who's initially introduced in the Clone Wars series as not necessarily the most endearing young character, young Padawan, but seeing where the character's gone in the recent Rebels series is pretty awesome, and so that's the version that I'm taking on here. And contrasting this Ahsoka art with the previous one with Kanan, you can see the difference that some extra time makes. Being able to work through those initial sketches until I found something that I really liked. Even though this final pose I think could have been pushed or exaggerated a little bit more, it just turned out a lot better than the day before, and that's sort of the nature of this kind of thing. As with most of my art in the last 2 years, I've been using Procreate on the iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil. What you see me do is lay down an initial sketch and then go behind that layer, flat out the colors, and then paint and illustrate, building up colors from there. Now, as for why I'm creating a new Star Wars character every day this month on top of personal projects like finishing up that parcel comic, client projects and other things, other commitments, I'm doing it completely for fun. I'm doing it because of my love for Star Wars. Star Wars is something that is a huge part of me and a huge part of my family as well. It's sort of this thing that I've inherited, or it's a kind of a part of the heritage of my family. I talked about in a video right before The Force Awakens came out 2 years ago called Character Design Appreciation Astromechs, and I talked about how Star Wars is something that my dad grew up with in the late 70s and early 80s, and it's something that I was able to grow up with because he passed that on. And R2-D2 has always been one of my favorite characters because in this universe of, warriors and fighters, there's R2-D2 right now on screen. In this, battle universe of Star Wars, R2-D2 is a fixer. And my dad is someone who is a fixer and engineer, and that's a huge part of who he is, and that's always been a connection that I've had. So R2-D2, who I'm building here, I really took advantage of a lot of the straight line, quick line features in Procreate. I really was trying to build him as cleanly as possible. Instead of a really painterly look like a lot of the other characters, I was really building all of the shapes as clean as possible. R2 is someone who I've drawn quite a few times before, and so just matching him with this style, I ended up adding sort of the painterly texture elements at the end. Next up is everyone's favorite mystery boy, the guy who launched the expanded universe single-handedly. That's not true, but Boba Fett was kind of one of those characters that was a mystery, really, and made people go, hey, I want to know more about that guy, because not enough information is really given to you in the movies. And that's something I've always really loved about Star Wars, is it's not just the movies, and that's something that I wanted to make sure my illustration series reflected. It's not just all of the obvious choices that I've put into this selection. There are characters from games and comics and books from the universe. I've already got Kanan and Ahsoka in here, which are fairly well known, but I think you might be surprised by some of the more obscure choices that I have a little bit later in the month, so keep your eye out for that. I liked this pose for Boba Fett, how he was off the ground. I was able to get that jetpack working and fixed some perspective choices that I had made, some mistakes really from the beginning. Next up is Finn, who is a character that I really appreciate in hindsight because he's been created as, I think, as a plot device for your first viewing, as maybe a bait and switch character. The character you think will end up being the new Jedi based on sort of the trailers and stuff from The Force Awakens, way back when. I'm talking 2015 visions of Finn and stuff. But really who, upon repeated viewings of The Force Awakens, which, y'all, I know there's people who don't like Force Awakens, and I'm sorry about that, but it's such a critic-proof movie for me. We end up watching it all the time. I love how Finn is really just, he's able to hold his own, even though he's sort of a mix of these sort of archetypes in Star Wars. You've kind of got the rogue element, the command or military element of characters, and he kind of fits in between a few of those, not to mention being a stormtrooper himself. One quick thing before I let you go, it's actually a news item, and that's that this week, today actually, Patreon announced that they were reversing the changes that everyone was fearing, the ones that would be detrimental to small-time creators and people who were supporting their favorite creators at a small level. That's great timing for you guys, because for me, anticipating these changes, I just went ahead and added a ton of value to each of the tiers on my own Patreon at patreon.com/bageldenizen. One of the things I added was a personalized 5-minute video just for you, either critiquing your art, reviewing your portfolio, answering your questions, and that's just one of the things that I added. I sat down and did the math on this as a bit of a fun exercise. As unrealistic as it is to expect everyone to support this way, or even a majority, there are the select few people who like to dislike videos every time I mention Patreon, which I don't understand that mentality and probably never will. If everyone who was subscribed to this channel, on average, was supporting with between 6 and 10 cents a month, which is less than $1 or around $1 a year, I would be completely covered. Our bills, our expenses would be completely covered. And more. We would be able to afford insurance. We could compensate Mark for his work on Character Select. I would be making things for you guys full-time and making more things, better things. So if you're interested in making that happen, being audience supported is something I've had as a dream since I was a 17-year-old webcomic artist. If that's something you'd like to see happen, you can go to patreon.com/bakeldenizen, and there's a ton of stuff for you guys there. Hope you enjoy The Last Jedi in theaters. I'm going at midnight. No, I'm going at 10 o'clock. Midnight's way too late. Thank you so much for watching, and may you have fun creating.